there. You're watching World 360 on CNN News 18. I'm Maha Siddiqui. Over the next half an hour, we'll take you through all the major international stories of the week. But first up, the pivot, which was the Quad that took a quantum leap this week with a summit-level meeting. For the first time, the four countries, India, US, Japan and Australia, issued a joint statement and launched a vaccine initiative as a concrete deliverable to counter China's vaccine diplomacy. But before the deep dive, the headlines. The first ever Quad-level meeting takes place virtually. US, India, Japan and Australia seal a vaccine initiative to counter China and Indo-Pacific. Push for a free, open and inclusive region. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle's tell-all shakes up the British monarchy. The Queen addresses the charge of racism, says it will be looked into privately. And Myanmar demands arrest and deportation of police personnel who fled to India's northeastern states. This as shocking images of violence continue to emerge from Myanmar. It's a new dawn for the Quad. A group of nations that took hesitant steps over the last few years saw an enormous evolution with the leaders of the four countries meeting, though virtually, for the first time under the format. And while the aim is to provide an effective counter to China's aggression in the Indo-Pacific region, the Quad summit also looked at pressing issues like economic recovery after COVID-19 pandemic and climate change. A meeting described as historic by all four leaders. The first summit-level engagement of the Quad countries, India, US, Japan and Australia, over 13 years after the idea of the Quad first came about in 2007.
Quad had come of age.
What I think will be a new dawn in the Indo-Pacific.
The big deliverable of the summit was a vaccine initiative where US-developed vaccines will be manufactured in India, financed by US and Japan, and the last mile coverage in terms of distribution, storage will be done by Australia. The Quad aims at producing 1 billion doses by the end of 2022 to be distributed in the Indo-Pacific region. US Development Finance Corporation has announced financing for US one-shot vaccine Johnson & Johnson, among others, to be manufactured by Hyderabad-based Biological E.
We're launching an ambitious new joint partnership that is going to boost vaccine manufacturing and for the global benefit and strengthen vaccinations to benefit the entire Indo-Pacific.
A vaccine initiative to counter China's aggressive vaccine diplomacy, something Beijing has undertaken to blunt the blame it got for the COVID-19 pandemic. The first ever joint statement of the Quad also spoke about the traditional issues to counter China's aggression in the region. A free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific, international law in maritime domain, including in maritime security, to meet the challenges to rules-based maritime order in the East and South China Seas. And even as China responded sharply ahead of the Quad summit, US and India claimed China wasn't the elephant in the room.
The four leaders did discuss the challenge posed by China, and they made clear that none of them have any illusions about China. But today was not fundamentally about China. Much of the focus was on pressing global crises, including the climate crisis and COVID-19.
We have always said that the Quad does not stand against something, it stands for something.
Significantly, the leaders have decided to meet again this year in person for the second Quad summit. And even though an expansion of the Quad has been ruled out for the moment,
Open Indo-Pacific is essential to each of our futures, our country.
the Quad has indicated that it is willing to work with Europe on an Indo-Pacific strategy. Maha Siddiqui, CNN News 18, Delhi. And joining us now from Washington, D.C. is the head of U.S.-India Strategic Partnership Forum, Dr. Mukesh Aghi. Dr. Aghi, many thanks for speaking with us. The first question, Dr. Aghi, is with regards to the vaccine initiative. Does it show the intent of other countries, namely U.S., Japan and Australia here, that India could be cultivated as an alternative manufacturing hub to counter China? Or is that stretching the argument too far based on just one specific cooperation?
Well, I think first is the Quad is not just about China. It's about collaboration, cooperation among the four democracies. When you look at the GDP of these countries, almost $33 trillion. So it goes beyond vaccine. And you have to understand, we have a global crisis. It's a matter of life and death. And if India can be a part of that diplomacy where it can produce 1 billion vaccine for the region and supply that, it's a plus factor. You have to understand, China took advantage of the pandemic, the only country which took advantage of it. And when you look at India stepped up and supplied these vaccines to almost 145 countries, but the need is much greater. And so if you get the technology coming from US, financing coming from Japan, and last mile distribution from Australia, it's a plus factor. But when you look at the Quad itself, it goes beyond vaccine diplomacy. It talks about working group on climate change. It talks about working group on emerging technology itself. So I see a start of new era of collaboration. And I would say a light is shining on India, on its pharmacy and technology itself.
Dr. Aghi, since this was the biggest deliverable, the vaccine initiative, I want to ask you this question. US has placed embargoes on exports for raw materials, hampering manufacturing of some vaccines here in India, like Covishield. Isn't this a contradiction in the stand taken at the Quad for boosting vaccine manufacturing?
I would say no. And the reason I'm saying is because earlier, yes, there were certain restrictions placed in. But now what we're looking at is easing of those restrictions.
Okay.
And so I don't think there will be an issue on production of this billion vaccine and raw material need itself. So because both four nations are committed to make that happen, and there's a timeline, there's a deadline of by end of 2022. So I think these logistic issues will be sorted out, and you will see vaccine delivered in the Pacific region.
Also, Dr. Aghi, in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, maintaining resilient supply chains is also an important aspect under consideration. Now, despite whatever is said against China, realistically, how possible is it to keep them out of the picture?
Well, yes, you cannot keep them out of the picture, but I think what we are seeing is the boardrooms across the world are asking, what is my China plus one strategy? You can't have all your manufacturing in one nation and then run into challenges. So we are seeing a slow transition, but consistent transition of manufacturing slowly moving out of China to other geographies. And you look at a classic example would be Apple. Apple today is manufacturing or exporting roughly 400,000 iPhones from India to rest of the world. And if you look at 3 years ago, it was zero. So we see the trend picking up in other areas also. So I think, yes, China still plays a vital part, but I think it's becoming lesser and lesser.
Dr. Mukesh Aghi, many thanks for speaking with CNN News 18 on this very crucial aspect. Meanwhile, it's significant to note that this meeting was hosted by US President Joe Biden as the first multilateral meeting since he came to power. The US is also keen on hosting another summit this year itself, which will be in person. CNN's national security correspondent Kylie Atwood from Washington, D.C. explains what's the Biden administration's push that it is giving for greater relevance to Quad.
I think they are. I think that's right. Administration officials have said that the reason that they are having this meeting, President Biden engage in this meeting early on, is because they want to make the Quad a regular part of American diplomacy. They really want to continue engaging with these countries. And of course, that is highly significant given what we are seeing on so many fronts, given what's happening with rise of China, given what's happening with these vaccines. And so I think it's important to note that they are putting this at the front of their calendar. And of course, they are also announcing that they are going to be doing things together. This isn't just, a meeting to talk about issues kind of broadly and not come up with any agenda items. They are making commitments to work with one another on vaccine production. And that, of course, is hugely significant, particularly because you can't ignore the fact that China has been involved in shipping vaccines abroad, and this is something that the Quad is going to start doing on their own.
Kylie Atwood there getting us details of what's on the Biden administration's mind as it pushes forward with the Quad. Now, while the Quad nations are collaborating as democracies trying to uphold international laws, Hong Kong is facing an erosion of one at the hands of China. That and more in World in a minute. Expressing disapproval of the discussions on Indian farmers' protest and press freedom in the British Parliament, India summoned British High Commissioner, terming it a gross interference and vote bank politics. India will send 15 million doses of the homemade COVID-19 vaccine Covishield to Pakistan, under an agreement under the United Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. In his first primetime address to the nation, US President Joe Biden announced that all states, tribes and territories have been told to make all individuals who are 18 and above eligible to be vaccinated by the 1st of May. On the occasion of International Women's Day, Dhaka-based Boishaki TV hired the country's first transgender news anchor, Tashnoona Anand Shishir. During the bulletin, Tashnoova was quoted saying, "This could be revolutionary and create a new dimension in people's thinking." China has pressed sweeping changes for Hong Kong's electoral system, further restricting the ability of people in the city to freely elect their leaders. UK Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab calls it the latest step by Beijing to hollow out the space for democratic debate in Hong Kong. Taking a quick break now. Coming up next, India faces a tricky situation with neighbor Myanmar as people flee military excesses after the coup. CNN News 18's Arunima with a special report in a bit. Welcome back. Let's now turn our attention to UK, that has been jolted this week by allegations of racism against the British royal family by none other than the Duchess of Sussex, Meghan Markle. Sanjay Suri now joins us from London for more. Sanjay, is the Meghan Markle-Harry interview still a topic of conversation in the UK?
It very much is, Maha, and will be for a long time. Because, this is not just a one-off. This sort of thing seems to happen within the royal family with almost generational inevitability. People are seeing a pattern here. And it's a pattern that suggests that royalty doesn't take very kindly to people who are outside the pale, liaisons with people, marriage with people outside the pale. And people haven't stopped talking about Diana and Edward. In this case, there is a very serious and very sticky charge of racism, and that can't easily be talked away because it's not just a war of words between the royal and a near ex-royal. The fact is that Meghan and Harry have underlined their sentiment with separation, with an actual split that has taken place. It's also quite noteworthy that the palace has suggested a denial without making a denial pointedly. There's a suggestion from the palace that, well, recollections can vary, and Prince William, when confronted, did not say outright that no royal ever made the remark as alleged. We see that he chose his words very carefully.
Explosive revelations by the Duchess and the Duke of Sussex in a bombshell of an interview to Oprah Winfrey, which has kicked up a storm on both sides of the Atlantic. In a damning allegation, Meghan made racism charges against the world's most famous royal family.
And also concerns and conversations about how dark his skin might be when he's born.
Heir to the throne, Prince William has responded to these charges.
We're very much not a racist family.
Buckingham Palace too issued a statement on behalf of the Queen that said the royal family will address allegations of racism. The issue raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately.
I just didn't want to be alive anymore.
Meghan also revealed that she was driven to despair by the British royal family and contemplated suicide.
There was an opportunity, many opportunities, for my family to show some public support.
The royal family has been hit by some major controversies over the last few decades. From Lady Diana's and Prince Charles' ugly divorce to her death in a car crash in Paris, to Prince Andrew's association with Jeffrey Epstein and the sex scandal. A charge of racism in a world growing intolerant of such attitudes may have been the last thing they wanted. Let's now discuss how the UK media has been projecting this story. Sanjay, give us more details.
Well, you know, the media is very much at the heart of this. The media is, in fact, the reason almost for the separation, as Prince Harry has alleged and Meghan has, that the media got after them. And the media they're talking about is the loyalist media, the media loyal to the palace. And we've seen a lot of a tabloid hounding of royalty, and it didn't begin with them. It seemed to have targeted them particularly, and they seem to have reacted to it. And following the interview, there is a split across the media. A lot of the loyal media is now trashing these two, but a lot of the media is also defending them. And that really depends on the political inclinations of the media. So there's a split in the media and right across the media, and that's keeping this debate going very, very actively.
Sanjay Suri, many thanks for joining us with all those details and the story from London. Now, from the Sussexes, recounting the past couple of years to what we are expecting in the coming week. New Delhi will be hosting the first senior official of Team Biden on the 19th and the 20th of March. US Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin will visit India next week along with Japan and South Korea in the first overseas trip of a senior member of the new Biden administration. This is the first time that India has been included in the itinerary of the first overseas trip of a US Defense Secretary. Lloyd will be meeting with Defense Minister Rajnath Singh and others to discuss the operationalizing the major defense partnership with India, including through advanced information sharing, regional security cooperation, defense trade, and cooperation in new domains. And from India's relations with the country across the Atlantic to the one next door, India faces a sticky situation as violence continues unabated in Myanmar. Civilians opposing the military coup are taking to the streets and facing a harsh crackdown by the military. Now, some have decided to flee to India. This includes a handful of police personnel who refuse to take military orders to shoot at civilians. Arunima explains what this could mean for India-Myanmar ties under the military regime.
Myanmar is on fire, and at least 2 states in India's northeast are feeling the heat: Mizoram and Manipur. More than 100 people have crossed River Tiao from the Chin state of Myanmar to seek refuge in Mizoram. Many others have landed in Manipur and enjoy popular support.
The people of Mizoram support you, and we love you.
This support on the ground is proving tricky for the Indian government, which is trying to do a tough balancing between denouncing the coup and violence and ensuring that it doesn't overtly upset the military junta. Reason, it could have serious consequences for India's northeastern states that have long battled insurgency. Mizoram shares a 404-kilometer-long porous border with Myanmar's Chin, and people have families on either side. Bridges across River Tiao from Chin state of Myanmar to Champai in Mizoram have forged ties of kinship over generations, which is giving fleeing Myanmaris confidence to cross over. Some among those seeking refuge are policemen and women who have fled after having refused military's order to shoot at protesting civilians. The state governments are willing to provide sanctuary, but the central government is circumspect. Here's why. Citing bilateral ties, Deputy Commissioner of Phalam district in Myanmar has written to his counterpart in Champhai in Mizoram asking India to arrest and send back 4 police personnel who landed in Aizawl and 4 others who fled to Champhai. Union government has a clear policy towards the other set of Myanmar nationals who have entered India illegally. Rohingyas fleeing religious persecution in their home country recently saw detention in Jammu as well under the MHA Directive of Detention, Identification and Deportation. In the latest round of influx as well, the Ministry of Home Affairs has written to state governments of Nagaland, Manipur, Mizoram and Arunachal Pradesh as well as Assam Rifles, asking them to be alert and prevent people from crossing the Myanmar border. The letter also reminds the state government that it is not within their purview to treat the Myanmarese nationals who are crossing over as refugees. India has maintained a working relationship with the military junta during its earlier regime that started in 1962 and ended in 2011. In June 2015, because of the close ties between Indian and Myanmarese military, strikes could be carried out against Indian insurgents hiding in Myanmar. Last year, at the height of the pandemic, Myanmar handed over 22 insurgents to India, factors which is making a decision difficult for North and South Bloc. In New Delhi, Arunima.
CNN's Paula Hancock now joins us with more details on this story from Myanmar. Paula, first of all, what's the ground situation like currently there?
Yes, Maha, the images and the footage that's coming out of Myanmar really is shocking. And we're hearing from the UN as well that they are quite appalled by the situation there. It really seems as though the level of force that security forces are willing to use against the protesters has increased over the past couple of weeks. Now, the latest figures the UN has is at least 80 people that have been killed. But we're speaking to activists on the ground, and they believe that number is far higher. The UN obviously is only counting people that they can confirm, but those who are physically on the ground, the protesters, the activists, say that they believe the number is far higher. Now, we did hear from the UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights in Myanmar, Tom Andrews, and he said that this brutal response he believed was, quote, meeting the legal threshold for crimes against humanity. So this is how the United Nations is seeing it at this point, this very high level of violence against the protesters. But day after day, we do still see them coming out onto the streets. We did hear from the military spokesman pointing out that they believed that they were using a minimal amount of force, something those on the ground would not agree with, also pointing out that they respect the international community, but they'll stick to what they are doing, also saying that they do respect press freedom, despite the fact that they have arrested dozens of journalists. Maha?
That's right. Paula, Myanmar had written to India to arrest and send back their police personnel who had fled to India. Is there anything more that you have picked up on your end with regards to this?
Well, we had been hearing for some time that there were police who simply did not want to follow orders, who were not wanting to fire into crowds of unarmed protesters, and we've heard reports from within the country of those who have defected and joined the protest movement. Now, as you say, there have been hundreds, we understand, 200 to 300 at this point, who have crossed the border into India. This is, we're being told, police, government officials and also families, and that number is potentially expected to increase daily. Now, local officials within India are telling CNN that they're not going to deport them. They're not going to push them back into Myanmar. They say that this is a humanitarian issue. They also say that those that have come across the border are not criminals. It is a political issue. So they are providing them at this point with food, with shelter, with whatever they need. And then the local officials say it's up to the central government to decide what to do.
Paula, many thanks for joining us with all those details. Now, the situation continues to remain grim, as we can see, even as the international community, including the Quad countries, have emphasized on the urgent need to restore democracy in Myanmar. Well, that's it then for now. See you again next week. Bye-bye.